Hey, it's Lawrence from High Intensity Business. Hope you're well. So today's podcast is with Tom Bisson. Tom is a high-intensity personal trainer. He has a wonderful story. And in this podcast, you will learn how he went from £0, £0 per month to generating £16,000 sterling. So call that roughly $18,000, depending on what the conversion rate is when you're watching this, per month in revenue in a one-man high-intensity training business, so a one-person business. So he talks through that entire journey, all of the ups and downs, the failures, the challenges, and there are many. So this is a very, very inspiring story and will give you the motivation and some of the tactics and mindset to succeed in your own business. And there's quite a nice twist at the end. Tom actually realized that once he'd reached the £16,000 per month in income, that he was actually quite miserable. And what he was able to do is change his business model slightly, become just as profitable, but actually focus on the work that he loves the most, the work that he finds most meaningful, and have the best of both worlds. So I think you're going to really, really enjoy this episode. After you've listened, please head over to highintensitybusiness.com/tactics to get access to free resources to help you grow your high intensity training business. Please subscribe so you will get notified when a new episode is released. And without any further ado, let's start this fantastic podcast. So Lawrence Snill here. Welcome back to highintensitybusiness.com. This is episode 282. And today's topic is a bit different. We're going to talk about how to build a successful health and fitness business. But we're going to talk about how to build one that makes you happy. And that's kind of the arc to this. And we'll see where it all ends up. But today's guest is a good friend of mine, Tom Bisson. Tom, am I pronouncing your last name correctly there?
Yep, Thomas Bisson.
Oh, excellent. I'm glad. I should have asked that before we started recording, but I'm glad I got it right first time. So quick note on Tom. 3 months after Tom completed a 5-week personal training intensive course, he started up his own business. He went through 2 failing personal training business models to making £16,000 sterling. So let's call that $18,000-$19,000. I don't know what the exchange rate is today, but it's around that per month. As a one-man band with no location. Great achievement. We know we have many listeners of the show who would like to start a hit business. And obviously that can happen in a number of different formats: studio business, online business, no location business, training people from their homes, virtual training, etc. And that is a nice figure to aim for some of those people. Through discovering objectivism, Tom discovered Dr. Doug McGuff, Mike Menser, and the high intensity training method. He took those principles and applied them in his own training, testing them to the extreme by doing an ultra marathon and multiple distance triathlons, including Ironman distance. And his passion is ice hockey, randomly. Tom, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Lawrence.
I'm grateful for you taking the time and been excited to chat. So I thought we were just going to start at the beginning, right? So tell me about how you started your personal training business way back.
So very interestingly enough, I was going between the idea of being a personal trainer for many years. And a conversation with my brother happened where he was like, "You'll work blood, sweat and tears and never make more than 30K a year." And that one sentence put me off of going into business or going into becoming a personal trainer more than anything else, because I've seen what happens when you don't make a lot of money, and I've lived in that kind of lifestyle. And so I always wanted to make money. Fast forward a few years, I was become frustrated with not knowing what I wanted to do. I got to the point where I almost decided to go and join the army, because I was just like, I'll just do that. Why not? And then I called up my other brother and I said to him very calmly, "I'm coming to your house this weekend and I'm not leaving until I figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life." So
no pressure.
no pressure, but get a bed ready. And it was great. So I went up there, and the passion for me was fitness. If there's 2 things that I love fitness because what it did for me in my life, and I love sharing and teaching. So I love sharing experiences and teaching and seeing other people being able to transform their lives. From that, I went on to do my 5-week intensive course. I booked it that weekend. And I went, and for the first time ever, I mean, I'm not a student of the classroom. You put me in a classroom, I get distracted. I'm doing anything I'm not meant to be doing. And I'm just away with the fairies. But for the first time in my life, I did the one where you sit in the classroom. I was at there was a Pret a Manger around the corner from the classroom, and I was there at 6 a.m. every day, and I stayed behind till 9 p.m. at night just because I wanted to commit fully to this.
Do they have Pret in the US?
I don't
Just
know.
in case they don't, for the US listeners, Pret is like a nice cafe shop where people kind of drink coffee. You can have a sandwich there, that kind of thing. Cafe, is how you would, I guess, describe it?
I'd say a form of Starbucks.
Yeah, that's way better way of putting it. Very similar to Starbucks. Slightly less expensive probably than Starbucks.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and just the one piece of advice my brother did give me when I was choosing what I was going to do, he said to me, no matter what you do, there's always money to be made if you're the best you can be at it. And that's what really gave me the confidence to go for personal training. Because I was watching MTV back when MTV was a thing. And there was a show that came on that was like the 10 most expensive things in the world. And number 4, I think at the time, was Gunnar Peterson, who is like celebrity trainer to the stars, where it worked out that he was charging $360 per 15 minutes.
Wow.
So yeah, that's what sort of inspired that.
And this sounds like this brother of yours, this particular sibling, was quite inspiring. Like, was he quite successful in his own right?
He is successful in his own right. He holds himself to very high standards. He's a film director. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of rejection in that. So he's just keeps plugging away.
Any films of note that I would know?
Probably not. But he has worked with some big time. What's her name? Some sort of singer.
Sure.
Yeah, I know. My knowledge around pop culture is not the best, I'm afraid.
That's fine, mate. That's not what we're here to talk about. So we'll let you off. Cool. So sorry, I know I interjected there and kind of broke your pattern a little bit, but what was next then for you once you saw that Peter Gunnarsson? Yeah.
So Gunnar Peterson. I went and done that's all right. I went and done the 5-week course, and I was all in. I was fully committed, and the course where I did the course, they had a gym attached, and they were starting up their own personal training studio, and they liked the commitment that they saw from me, and I got into conversations with people, and they actually headhunted me from the course and said, look, if you don't have a gym to go to after, come work here. And so it sounded like a great idea. It was a brand new facility, top of the line equipment. And I just went for it. And the thing that I loved most about it was that the teachers who taught me were upstairs, so I could always go up and learn more. I was at that phase where learning was everything. And I thought at that particular time, the better the trainer I was, the more money I would make, the more clients I would get. And little did I know how wrong I was in that regard. But finished the course, qualified. I worked my way to level 5, which I believe is like obesity and diabetes, like specialist. And I just went straight in. I had to do all my own leafleting. I had to so they used to give me this big old stack of leaflets, and I would take them out. I would do 1,000 leaflets every day, standing by train stations, handing them out. And very slowly, I built up to have the most clients in the gym. And we were doing a 3-month internship, they called it. And at 3 months, we were going to negotiate pay. So at this particular time, I was only allowed to charge £30 an hour. and of that £30, they would take 15, so 50%. And I was like, okay, fine. That's for the first 3 months. I'm happy for that.
Sure.
So I worked to the point where I had got like all the way up to, I think at the time I had 15 clients within 3 months, all paying various packages.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just before the 3 months ended, the manager came down and said to me, hey, look, we've got your review next week. How are your clients looking? Are they all up to date on their sessions? And I said, yes, like some of them are coming to the end of their packages. And she sort of gave me a bit of a wink and a nudge and said, look, if you sell on the next load of packages, then, you know, it's going to look really good in your review. And I was like, done, 100%.
Yeah.
Went and did it, upsold everyone, got called into the meeting. And they were asking, you know, how was the experience? And I said, yeah, it was really good. Asked me what I'd like to change, gave them a list. And they were like, okay, brilliant. We're going to have to let you go.
God.
And I was like, I was shocked. I was like, what did I do? What have I done wrong? And they're like, oh, you haven't done anything wrong, but Dwayne Chambers is going to come and PT for us here. And in case you don't know, Dwayne Chambers was like an ex-Olympic athlete.
Yeah, great sprinter.
Yeah. And they were like, you know, he can charge £150 an hour and you can't. And I was like, well, what about my clients? Mm-hmm. And they said to me, don't worry about your clients. They've already been contacted and told they're being moved on to other trainers. And in that moment, I realized how vulnerable I was. Mm-hmm. Out comes a document, like a legal document, stating how I'm not allowed to reach out to any of these clients for at least 18 months. Otherwise, they will pursue me for legal actions.
Mm-hmm. And to make non-compete, basically. Yeah.
Basically, and to make matters worse, they ended up not paying me my final month. Mm-hmm. Effectively, like I left that building with no money. Like, I didn't find out I wasn't getting paid until a month later. But so I walked out. I was £50 into my overdraft, and I thought to myself, like, I had no clients, I had no knowledge about anything, and I just thought, what am I going to do? Mm. And it was in that moment that I swore, never again will I allow someone to have that much control over my life, my business, anything. And that's when I got my very first credit card. And I bought a couple of little bits and pieces, like a couple of bands and stuff. Got a backpack, and I went into London every single day. I got the 5 a.m. train into London, and I didn't know sales. I didn't know marketing. So what I would do, I would stand outside coffee shops in West London. And at the time, I thought West London's the only place where there are rich people or people who are willing to pay for fitness. And I would wait around coffee shops, look for people who looked like they were into fitness, and just approach them, try and start a conversation, and hope I could get it onto fitness so I could get personal training.
Yeah, I salute you.
Yeah, and I managed to make £3,000 in my first month by doing that and training people from the park. Mm-hmm. And then that's where it started.
Just grew from there, really, did it?
Pretty much. I ended up moving from West London to East because I thought it was ridiculous traveling that amount every day. Like I wasn't getting home till 11 o'clock at night. Mm. And you know, when you're training people, the biggest kick in the nads is the dead time between clients.
Between sessions, right? Yeah.
And so I just wanted to deal with that, really.
Yeah, so let's just pause because I do want to hear how you scaled it, but a couple questions. So just for context, you were getting the train from Essex, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's where you're from and where you live now. Is that correct?
I live in Stratford now, but I work in Essex.
Got it. Okay. And you were coming in, so whereabouts in West London? Whereabouts were you hanging out? I'm just curious because I lived in West London for a long time. So
Sloane Square.
Okay. Oh wow. Well, that's like, Central West.
That's right.
that's that's super high end. I remember I was in my boss's car when I worked in IT sales in London, and we were driving around. I want to say Sloane Square, I think it was, and this car went past us. We let this car go by us, and it was like a really fancy, saloon car. I can't remember what it was, probably like a Bentley or something. And it had two private school kids inside. They both had like the fancy uniform. And my boss just said, "Oh, look, it's Tarquin and Farquhar," like that. And I just burst out laughing. And whenever I think about it now, it just makes me smile because it was just such a funny moment. And it's clearly had to be there. Otherwise, Tom would have laughed more hysterically. But no, it just to give that was just to give people an insight into, if they're not familiar, like it's a super fancy area. The real estate there is astronomical. Like my fiance worked in apartment sales in London for a while, and she actually would let apartments around there. So one day we got to stay in one for free. It's like a little freebie, and I felt like £1 million walking out of the place. And
Yeah, I always find it interesting because
good spot to be.
It's the kind of place that even the homeless people have a posh accent, and they're like, "Oh, I can't possibly accept this £1. Have you got two by any chance?" And I'm like, "Oh no, not really."
So you were hanging out there, and you must have been. I mean, I can't stand those people that approach me on the high street and try and get me to sign up for Oxfam or any one of these charities. So you must have got, what was the rejection rate like? I mean, you must have got shot down like a whole bunch.
Oh yeah. Do you know the worst ones were the overweight middle-aged man who was like basically used to just stand there. Sometimes they would actually try and fight me.
Wow.
And because they're like trying to prove a point to whoever they're with. And other times they would just like, when someone's being really like, "Does it look like I need it?" kind of thing. And the whole time I'm trying to be professional. But in my head, I was just like, "Yes, mate, it does. That's why I'm asking you." And so I used to just have a bit of a sense of humor with it. And it's like, so in my head, no matter what I hear, like I'm just, it's quite dark humor, obviously, when you're getting constantly rejected. But I was just like, I don't know, want to see your kids next year, want to live to see you next year. Like just anything to sort of lighten the mood a bit. And one thing I realized is you'll be surprised what you can say if you don't care. Or if you're coming from what I call an adult place, you'll be surprised what you can get away with saying.
Like if you're authentic as well, just honestly unashamed.
Yeah, if you're not looking to. So there's a big difference I found, and this is something that we'll talk about later, but to say something and have someone be offended by what you've said is very different to trying to offend and then being offended.
Mm-hmm.
So if I say something and I don't mean it, I'm not coming from an offensive place, I'm not being intentionally trying to attack them, but they happen to be offended by what I've said, the conversation and the level of respect that is shown is vastly different.
Yeah, I love that, and I completely agree. And I think it's a very important concept to think about in the political world of today. I think we'd all agree. Yeah. So let's just go back to what you were saying. So you got to the 3K in your first month, which is incredibly impressive. I have a real soft spot in my heart for people who grind it out like that. And I think a lot of us have been in jobs or professions where we've had to do that to get ahead. And obviously there are other ways you can build a client base now. There are perhaps some smarter ways, but there's something about going through that which really builds character and resilience and builds a ton of skills as well. And obviously I've done that with my sales background. So how did you manage to scale it from there? So you got to the 3,000. Can you just talk from there, like how you grew that?
So 3,000. So I built that in the summer, and I was training people in the summer. And like the old Game of Thrones quote is, "Winter is coming." And so I knew that it wouldn't last forever because nobody wants to train when it's raining or wet or cold outside. And so I thought I have to start finding a place indoors that I can train these people from and actually get a real base of operations. And then I thought, do I really want to be around West London for this? And
what revenue mark were you at this point?
This was around the 3,000. So I was making about 3,000. I was still selling sessions. So I was selling blocks of 10. And
how many clients?
I think at this point I had about six or seven.
Okay.
So I was selling blocks of 10 and I was like, I was really happy.
You can do the maths, yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, this was the most amount of money I've ever made in a single month.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was a really big deal. I also had no idea how to manage that money, but
sorry to interrupt you again. Did you talk to me about, because I'm just thinking about like grassroots, like, because I get questions about from people like, oh, how do I do a business plan? Or how do I go and print business cards and flyers? And often I think those aren't really that important at the start. I mean, it's good to have some kind of plan and vision for what you want to do. But from listening to you, it sounds like you were just like, I'm just going to go take action. I'm just going to go get clients. Did you even set up a business entity? Were you just taking money in your personal account and then you thought, oh, I'll deal with that later? Could you talk a little bit about that?
I can. I set up my business. My business was set up on one phone call. I called, I think it was HMRC. I don't really remember who it was at the time. I called the government basically and said, I want to set up a business as a sole trader before I even did my personal training course.
Okay.
And I was
before you actually went and got a job?
Before I got a job, before I even had the qualifications, before I did anything, I called and created an ability for me to do that.
Yeah.
And then I didn't sit down for a business plan. I didn't, like I said, I knew nothing. I kid you not, I knew absolutely nothing. No sales, no marketing. Like for me at that time, it was so beyond understanding. I wasn't even aware of it. And so I was just like, I just want to train people. Now I have to go and find people to train.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I built. Like in terms of grassroots, it was just that. It was like, I'm just going to go and get out there and I'm sure I will find a way.
Sorry, I just want to ask some of these nitty-gritty questions in the beginning because I get them all the time, and I know that listeners are going to be curious. When you were how were you transacting them with those first clients? Were they just paying you cash? Were you setting them up with some online payment? Like, how were you doing that?
It was cash or bank transfer in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Cash, obviously, you can't beat cash. But banks transfer, I've discovered very quickly that banks transfer people are a lot more skittish and are less likely to follow through because the power is too much in their court.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first thing I did actually was discover Stripe.
Mm-hmm.
So Stripe for me was a game changer. Where I could actually take their card in front of them. So it's like, you're not giving them a chance to go home and have their wife or their husband say, oh, are you sure you want to spend this money on this? And so I just, in the moment, it's just like reduce any kind of
friction.
Yeah. And for me, I had a lot of money beliefs as well at the time. At the beginning, I struggled to feel worthy of money. And you feel like you don't deserve to charge a certain amount. When I went out on my own, my first price point was £15 an hour because I didn't feel like I hadn't been in the game long enough. I didn't feel like I'd been in there long enough to be able to charge a certain amount of money. I didn't have the fancy gym or the equipment, so I felt like that couldn't have, all of these reasons. I was putting reasons in front of like the ability to charge. And I feel so awkward asking for money that it's like, that really weird, like 10, 15 minutes at the end of a session where you've got to try and resell the next block of 10. And it's just like, you're dancing around the topic and the subject. And you're like, yeah, how do I kind of say this? And I don't really know what to say. And I'm hoping that you're going to say it before I have to say it. And it's just, So yeah,
Or
that
you,
was
or you wait and you say, I'll just do it on email later, because you're
yeah,
too. Yeah.
yeah. And I know some people don't struggle with that at all, but it's something that I really did at that time in my life.
No, I think I'm really glad you brought this up, because I think it's one of the most common problems out there. I see it all the time. Lots of people have issue with charging, high prices, or just baggage with money in general. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Like, how did you overcome that, and talk to me about how you increased your prices over time?
So, I ended up going into an area where I decided to leave my clientele in West London. I took one person with me, and that was the only person who was willing to travel.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to start and rebuild my client base closer to home. And I found a little personal training studio where you pay X amount for rent, and like you just train people from there. And they pretty much told me straight off that I wasn't allowed to charge the amount that I was charging, because everyone else in the gym, all the other PTs, were charging around this amount, around 45 to 50 pounds an hour. Now, at the time, I was just like, oh my God, like I've never asked for that kind of money before. But I found a way to sort of rationalize it to myself. It's like, well, everyone else is charging it. And also now I have a gym, so I felt more comfortable. I made it more external. Instead of thinking that I'm worth the money, I put it more on the environment is clearly worth being around that, and it's not me.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of a studio, it was a great studio. There was, well lit, great space, great atmosphere. And I worked there for a few years, just building up. And I was still doing one-on-one training at the time.
And you were self-employed. You were just renting.
Self-employed, yep. Yeah. They would bill me every month. I would pay them. It was £500 a month for the gym rent, and I could use that as often as I wanted.
And just to be able to picture this, was it like, what did it look like? Did you have to share the studio with other trainers at the same time, or did you have your own space when you were, with clients? Like, how did that work?
It was a big old unit, so probably about 1,000 square feet, maybe just a bit more than that. Other trainers could be in there at any time. You just had to make do with the space that you had, and be mindful of each other.
That's a little bit annoying when you were paying that, but there you go.
Yeah.
You make do.
Hey, from what I was used to, it was like amazing.
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, I didn't, once again, because I'd gone from X amount of people to just one person now, I had to rebuild. And this time I thought I'd try leaflets, like my own leaflets. I'd seen them work before when I worked at that other place. And so I designed some and I hand wrote them, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so I'd got like a big stack of A4 papers, and I would write them. I remember I had no money really at this point. I'd spent most of the £3,000 getting myself out of that debt. And I was like, I just wrote a load of like leaflets. I wrote about 250 pages of A4 handwriting leaflets.
You hand designed your leaflet?
I hand designed, and I'm not an artist, by the way.
That's outrageous.
So it was the most basic message on the front, and I don't even know how many hours and days. I spread the work across a couple of days, and I was just done. I was like, by the time I'd written out these 250, I thought, you know what? I can't afford to hand this out and not get a return. And at first I was a bit like, so I took 50 because I thought, you know what, I can't handle more than 50 clients at a time anyway, thinking that every leaflet equals a sale. And I wouldn't put them through the letterbox. I would physically knock on the door.
Yeah, that's what I did.
My ethos was, I'm not going to leave a leaflet unless I shake a hand. Okay. And so I would just hand deliver. I delivered all these leaflets, and then I think I delivered like 20, had great conversations on the door, but didn't ask for sales, didn't ask for numbers, didn't ask for anything, just gave him the leaflet. And I pretty much went home and just looked at my phone. I was like, right, any minute now, those phone calls are going to start coming in. And then it got to 5 o'clock. I was like, oh, you know what? They probably just finished work. They need some time. Yeah. 6 p.m. happens. Oh, they probably just got home from work. They're just going to have some food and then they're going to call me. And, this went on for a couple of days. And then eventually you just get back out there and just go at it again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually got...
Hang on, let's just pause. So what do these leaflets look like? I mean, you said you hand wrote them. So what, they were just white A4 paper with what you did in your contact details?
Yeah, so I wrote...
Is there more to it than that?
So I wrote out personal training on the top. I wrote so my company was called Super Gene Personal Training. Now let me tell you, this was my first big lesson in business. Super Gene was something that I learned about from a friend of mine who did the genetics test. And in like 0. something% of the population, some people have what is called a super gene, where it allows people to recover a little bit faster, get a little bit stronger, and be a little bit more endurable.
Mm-hmm.
Of that population, you wouldn't even know you had that gene unless you were told you had it. Like, it's not blindingly obvious that you have it. And my friend and I, who was a bodybuilder at the time, we were joking, and he sent off this test, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to be get on the stage. I bet you I've got the super gene. Can you look at these gains? I've got the super gene." And when it came back, it turned out he had the fat gene at the time. And so he was devastated. And the conversation we had was like, well, obviously you do have a super gene because you're not fat. Like, look what you've done. The super gene is something you have created within yourself. It's not. So that was the whole, the story behind it was amazing. I was like, I went into so much detail about the story of the brand. And at the end of the day, nobody cares. Nobody cares. I would, I wrote on this leaflet, like Super Gene Personal Training. And I wrote all of the qualifications that I had, and my name and my phone number and my email address, which at the time was a Hotmail email address, which, it was just the only thing that I had at the time. It was my email address was, the one that you set yourself when you're 13 years old. It was like triple extreme, but I spelled extreme wrong.
Yes.
Triple extreme. It was like triple extra AM because I refused to have a number in the email address. So I'd rather have the spelling mistake than the number.
I'm just grateful that I think, because mine's lneil2@gmail.com is my personal. I probably shouldn't say that on the podcast, but I don't think I have enough listeners to be too worried about it. And I'm grateful that I had the sense to kind of use something sensible, because I definitely created that 20 years ago or something, like a long time ago. Yeah. Before that, it was Loz, like 1987 or something, LOZ, which is still relatively sensible. But yeah, there's I've heard some. Well, yours is a good example of some not too ideal email addresses. So it's interesting, because I guess now if you were to do the leaflets, I'm sure you wouldn't probably handwrite them these days. But if you did, it would be much more of the hero's journey, talking about the client, their experience, how you can help them. You were very kind of internally focused on yourself, which doesn't work so well in marketing. Most of us know. So,
very true. And also, nobody knows what advanced TRX training is or kettlebell. They don't they're like, okay, great. And so when I handed all this stuff out, I ended up getting one client from this, and it was he turned out to be a really good client, because I did the most ridiculous offer. I used to, so it got to the point where I was like, you know what, there was nothing more upsetting than going to a house, knocking on the door, and no one being home. So I could take a rejection, but when you're refusing to give a leaflet to someone unless you've shaken their hand, a rejection is fine. I can learn from a rejection, but I can't learn from no one being home. And so instead I started going to businesses and walking into the office. I wish I could tell you how I used to do it. To this day, I don't even know. I would just blindly blag my way in, past the security, past the guards and stuff. And I'd get into the actual office arena and just start handing this stuff out. And I saw this guy, one of the CEOs actually called me into his office and said, "Hey, look what you hear about." And I told him personal training, and I just made up on the spot. I was like, "I'm doing an offer in January, £200, unlimited sessions." And he was like, "Okay, I'll take 3." And I was like, "Okay." And that was it. I was like, sort of on the spot, kind of had no intention of an offer or anything. Ended up training him, his son, and his daughter. And that guy in the end recommended me going into like a business networking group. And I don't know if I think they've got it in the States. It was BNI.
Yeah, BNI is global. I think it's an American company, I believe.
Yeah.
Huge, excellent format. Yeah.
So I ended up going into BNI, and like I was just able to afford it, just about able to afford it. I started getting a couple more clients just through sheer determination. And the hours I'm talking, I was spending probably 2 to 3 hours a day training people, and 12 hours out trying to meet people. So and by the end of the day, you're just exhausted. You've just taken so many rejections. And I ended up going into BNI and start networking with people, got a few more clients. I was able to sort of just get by. In terms of money I had for myself at the end of every month, I was probably living off of about £100 a month. So I was eating tins of tuna every day. I worked out that I could afford to get public transport to the locations, but I couldn't get it home. So I had to choose whether or not I was running or walking home or going there.
Yeah.
And but just to everyone listening, because I know I've been talking for a while, it does get better. It does get better.
Yeah, no. This is good. So am I right in thinking, did the 3K drop then when you left London? So you had to take a hit for a moment, and you were literally like operating on practically nothing and had to rebuild. That's really interesting. I'm just going to pause for a moment. Just want to say there's one thing I want to mention. BNI, this is a really important point. BNI, I've done BNI. I was part of BNI when I was in sales in London. Really productive. Met some great people. There are many very successful high intensity training businesses that have leveraged BNI very successfully. Fit20, who are the fastest growing personal training company in Europe, have BNI as part of their system for every single new franchise. So it's like one of the marketing steps. And it's so effective because typically in HIT, we are working with busy professionals, and BNI is typically full of busy professionals. And so it's a great way for you to actually engage with your target market, offer your services, promote it, and obviously build referrals through. So the whole point of BNI is you generate business through referral from people you meet in the room. And the key aspect to actually having success from BNI, because it does take work, it does take a fair amount of work, but it's worth it, is that you have to give. It's a giver's gain is the whole philosophy. So you have to provide value to the people in the room. If you want to learn more about this, listen to my podcast with Owen Dockham at Live Oak Strength. If you just search Owen Dockham on highintensitybusiness.com, he will tell you about how BNI was literally responsible for something like 75% of his total revenue when he started his business. So that is huge for him. And then obviously once you start getting clients in the door and start training them, then referrals should be your biggest source of new leads. But BNI is a fantastic investment in the beginning. So I just wanted to mention that in case obviously listeners want to find out more about that. But Tom, you were saying, so things get better.
Things get better.
Tins of tuna are upgraded.
Yes. So
what happened next?
So I joined BNI, and I do want to add what Lawrence just said, very important. However, you have to bear in mind, you have to run BNI as if you're running a business. You've got to be looking at your X's and your O's. Remember that it is an investment. And what I got into the habit of doing was using it as a social and taking it too much for granted. So you really have to work it, and also understand that not everyone is as honest as they appear. Yeah.
You'll find like there's normally like 1 or 2, maybe 3 people who actually will deliver referrals for you, and then there's a lot of dead wood. I agree. So, is that what you kind of saying?
Yeah. So just be smart about it if that's something you do go into. It works for some people. I ended up getting a few clients from it, but like I said, I just wasn't doing it smartly.
Mm-hmm.
If I went back and did it again, I'd do it completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up becoming the chapter president because I allowed myself to get wooed into it, and it was costing me so much more time than it was
It's a
worth.
lot of work. If you're not getting a return and you're getting
Yeah,
more and more responsibility, like that could be quite debilitating. Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it all changed actually in I can't remember what year it was. It was about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It was November. It was a Thursday. And I got a phone call. Like, basically, it was a BNI day as well. I'll never forget this. I went and done my morning sessions before I went to the BNI meeting. And as it turned out, just by sheer freak coincidence, and this proves how fragile my business model was. At the time, it was, you do 10 sessions, you buy the next lot. Do 10 sessions, you buy the next lot. There was no contract, there was no prearranged agreement, no terms and conditions. And so on this particular day, 2 clients pregnant, can't train anymore. Brilliant. 1 client moving away, can't train anymore. Awesome. I lost 80% of my clients in that one day.
Wow.
80% of my clients, which went to about 90% of my income. And I was just like, oh my God, what's going on? I was sort of walking around in a daze. I went home and I was living with my parents at the time. And they said to me, we've just decided to sell the house. You've got to be out at the end of the month. And the end of the month was 10 days away. So not only have I now just lost 90% of my income, I've also just picked up another expense of trying to find a place to live and rent. And I was just like, oh God. And to make matters worse, at the time, my girlfriend left me as well. So it was like, oh, things come in threes.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I sat there and I called one of the trainers, one of the BNI trainers, who said he's a sales expert. That's how he positioned himself. And this is a key point I want to put across to everyone. It's very easy to pretend like everything's okay. But the real power comes in just actually being truthful with yourself, knowing when you need help, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to ask for help. And so I called up my friend, I called up the sales guy, and I said, I'm in trouble. This is where I am. And I told him everything. I was very upfront, and I was like, am willing to do whatever it takes to make something work. I just need to know what to do. And he took a deep breath and just said, you probably need to go get a job.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, that's something, it was heartbreaking to hear. I put the phone down, and at the time, I ended up meeting one person at BNI that I am, to this day, like, he's actually my best friend now. And he's similar age, and I called him up and I said, I knew he had a guitar school, so very similar kind of service-based industry. And I knew he was successful at it. And so I called him and I said, exactly the same thing I just told you. I said, this is where I'm at. I'm in trouble. Can you help me? And after that, I've got this really weird habit. So if there's someone that I like, I will have no shame about calling them up and be like, hey, I want to be your friend. What's that going to take?
Yeah, I can vouch for that. Not that you've done that with me, but you have this very candid, very likable trait to you, which it's quite nice. But it is definitely very unique to you, I think. Yeah.
So I did that to I went and done Doug McGuff's phone call or whatever, and on the phone call I was like, Doug, in about 5 years I'm going to be your best friend. So I'm just letting you know. So if he's listening to this, I still remember it. It's still up here. I will be his best friend in 4 or 5 years.
I love it. I had no idea.
And so, the piece of advice that my friend gave me was two very simple things to do. Number one is to get the book Think and Grow Rich and read one chapter every day for a week. Read that one chapter every day for a week. And I was like, okay. And he said, if you want to be my friend, you have to read Atlas Shrugged. And I was like, random, but okay, I'll do it. Now, little did I know at the time it was the 4th largest novel ever written. And and I didn't realize what I just committed to. I said to him, oh yeah, you go watch the film Miracle on Ice and I'll read this book, thinking it was a fair trade. But clearly he made me work a lot harder for his friendship than I did for his. And that's what I did. And from there, I ended up changing everything. So I went from working like 60 hours a week with hardly any money. And remember, I had 10 days to try and make money. I had 10 days I worked out to make £1,500, and that was to break even. That was to start the next month with 0. And by day 8, I'd made £300. By day 10, I'd made 3,000.
How are you? Well, okay. Well, go back a second. How did you actually make it?
Like I said, it was just being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. It was just putting myself out there and saying, hey, look, I like just talking to people that I knew, admitting that I needed help. I stood up I went to BNI, I stood up in the room and I said, hey, guys, this might be my last month because I can't afford to keep going.
Did you, because you're quite, you've brought, just for the listeners, for some context, obviously we worked together, you're part of Fit Business Membership. And, when we first had a coaching session together, you literally brought me to tears with your story, because we're talking about one story right now, but you have a story which we must do a part 2 on maybe in the future, about your life growing up, which is also, you've gone through a lot of challenges there too. And it literally, brought me to tears. I'm quite a sensitive guy anyway, so that's no surprise probably. But when you were doing that, so when you were like totally vulnerable in BNI, like, were you keeping it together, or did you end up shedding any tears, or were you just, as you are now, like very kind of vulnerable, but I don't know how to put it. But just, I don't feel like, if you want to shed a tear, you can. We've had that happen on this podcast numerous times. But I feel like you sometimes can be at that place where you're like on the brink, but you don't. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, that's fair to say. The truth is,
you're quite stoic, I guess, is.
I wouldn't say I'm stoic.
Okay.
I would say, how to explain it? When you're really honest with yourself and you truly understand where you are, and you're not trying to avoid reality, like of what's going on, and you accept the consequences of every action that has led you to this point, there is a real freedom in that, and knowing that no matter what, you will be okay. Like, if you're really honest about things and you just put yourself out there, people are good. Fundamentally, we are good people. Everyone has goodness in them. And if you put out there are going to be some people that won't help you, of course, but there'll be a lot of people that will absolutely do whatever it takes to help you. And there'll be some people who try and take advantage. But if you come from a point of, this is where I am, I'm not trying to hide anything, people respond to that. If nothing else, they will respect it, because we live in a world, especially with Instagram, especially with social media, it's very easy to portray the best side of things.
Very true.
And
people are sick of that too, right? Especially now with COVID. People want to see the vulnerable, that more than anything. They can connect to that.
It's just real. So people, and the interesting thing is, there's nothing people hate more than a hypocrite. Like, you're saying you're doing all this amazing stuff, but you're actually not. 100%. And like, when you're just saying, look, this is me, and you're genuine, and like, that's all it is. Mm-hmm. I didn't get close to tears about it. when in front of people asking for help, because I wasn't looking to them to solve my problem. I was asking for help, but not looking to them to solve it. I was trying to solve the problem myself rather than expecting someone else to solve it. When you expect someone else to solve it, you're coming from a really needy place, and it's almost like you're a child asking mum and dad to clean up after you. Mm-hmm. Whereas, and I've been there before as well. So there's a real difference when you're in that adult place I was mentioned earlier, and you can say, hey, look, I want your help. I would really like your help, but that I know that I can make something happen myself. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I will. I'll figure something out.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So what happened then? So you stood up in BNI, you were totally vulnerable. And what was the response?
The guy who done the printing company basically printed out 5,000 leaflets for me for free. A couple of people made some connections and helped me pick up 2 new clients. And then that was just enough to sort of help me go. Mm-hmm. But then, like I said, I was calling friends, I was calling family members, and I was just being really, really honest. And this is where integrity really pays off, especially if you've been used your integrity early on. And so I was reaching back out to people, and people were just helping where they could. Even if it was just, hey, I don't know, this person wants a trainer, but you can try. And
how was the conversation going? Was it like you were saying, look, I'm in a really dark place. I need help. I'm running out of money. Are you interested? Or is there anyone else you know who'd be interested in personal training? Was that a high level, like what you were doing? Or was it not like that?
It was more human. I was just being human. It was so if I was to call you, I'd be like, Lawrence, I'm really sorry to call you like this, but I need help. And the moment you hear those words from a place where someone's actually genuine, like, you know, when someone's being genuine, like voice with you, the moment you hear those words, every single person, if they could help me or not, would listen. Yeah. And I would just be like, you know, I've lost 90% of my income. I've got 10 days to try and make X amount of money. I don't know what to do. I do personal training. Like, is there anything you can think of that you feel like might help me? And, you know, sometimes I'll be like, look, I'm really sorry to hear that, man. Like, if anything comes up, I'll keep you in mind.
Yeah.
And some people were like, yeah, book me in for 10 sessions.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I literally had a friend recently, actually, was in a pretty dark place himself, and he reached out to ask about mentors, and he asked me about who do you go to for mentorship. And it's funny because he's a good friend of mine, and because he was so honest and I could see he was so in need, I immediately responded with a video, recorded myself on video because he did the same to me, and tried to give him as much help as possible in terms of mentorship, because mentors are responsible for any modicum of success I've ever had. And, you know, the mentors I have today are just incredible. So, like, you're making me realize, like, I did that because he was coming from this place of real sincere, like, I need help, you know, that's powerful.
Yeah. And you know what, there's nothing. So by my desk, I've got a load of cards, just very bog standard cards. I think I can show you one here. Like, it says, be brilliant. So sometimes I'll just write out, like, if I've got a spare 10 minutes, I'll just write a note and post it off to someone randomly. Or I'll leave an audio note on someone's, if I'm thinking of them, I'll leave them an audio note to say, hey, look, just thinking of you. Hope you're doing really well. And you'll be surprised how much that can mean to someone.
Well, I can vouch for that because you did it to me and it was beautiful. I was like, it made my day, 100%. Yeah, I love that. So okay. So you managed to kind of dig your way out of that through vulnerability. Beautiful story. And then what happened? So did you get back to your previous, because let's just to build the timeline, you worked your way up to 3,000 a month. You then had to take a hit, move to Essex, start rebuilding. Then it all went to shit again, and that's where we are now, right? So what happened
Yes.
then?
So I'd made in the 10 days that I had to make £1,500. I ended up making 3,000. Now I understood that a level of effort it took to get to that was so extreme that it was not going to be sustainable, and I had to build a business model that could help me. And so that's what I did. I invested properly in marketing, talking to like my best friend who has a guitar school, and he helped me realize the beauty of leverage. And was like, at the moment, I have to trade hours for money. That's pretty much it. And so I decided to change that and become more leverageable. And so I switched from doing one-on-one personal training sessions to group personal training sessions, but charging the same amount as I would have done a normal personal training session. So now I've gone from doing like, 3 clients a day, making £150, let's say, from that, putting 3 hours of my day, plus obviously the dead time in between, to now doing 1 hour a day and making the same amount. And then I also found a book called The Automatic Customer, which talked about subscription-based models. So I applied that. I got terms and conditions in place to say that you need to give me at least some notice as a big part of it. So I started to create all these fail safes around everything. And then that's when I really started to learn about sales. That's when I really started to learn about marketing. And that's what really led me to build everything up. And I ended up leaving the personal training studio because I became very protective of what I'd created. I felt like I was onto something. And I started renting space at a local football club. So at this local football club, it's just an empty hall. I bought a couple of dumbbells, bands and stuff. And at this sort of time, I was reading Atlas Shrugged, which changed my life. And I read it. I fully just, I'd set an hour aside to read it. I'd read one sentence and then I'd have to stop and just contemplate my life because it's just destroyed 25 years of beliefs.
Do you want to just briefly mention to those who are listening who might not understand what Atlas Shrugged is about? Can you talk about what it's about, and maybe just objectivism is an incredibly deep concept. So just talk about at a high level, like how it changed you.
Atlas Shrugged is about being the hero of your own story and living your life for yourself and not expecting anyone else to live it for you. Your life, the whole purpose of your life is the pursuit of happiness. And the only way to do that is through being productive and living your highest values. What that actually means is finding something you are passionate about, something that you love, and doing it because you love it. And remembering that happiness isn't a destination, but it's actually in the doing of what you're in the doing. So imagine, you go to a football game, and people who think happiness is the destination, or what I did, I used to think money was the destination. Like, I want to make lots of money. And so I sort of give myself a condition that I can be happy when I make X amount of money. And I was treating it very much like that. And when you do that, it's almost like going to a football game or a soccer game, turning up at the stadium with your ticket. And as you give over your ticket, instead, they give you the score of what the match is. And you think you're going to be happy by the result, but in fact, it's actually watching the game, watching it unfold in front of you and being a part of it. That's where the happiness comes from. That's where the enjoyment comes from, not from the end result.
That's a beautiful analogy. I've never heard that.
Yeah. So that took a lot of time to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I need to revisit Atlas Shrugged. I think I read 30% and got distracted, which I know is going to upset you, Tom, because from what you said there, I should have been just totally immersed from start to finish. But I'm gonna revisit it definitely after listening to you, and obviously having some conversations with you and Richard inside Hit Business Membership. And Richard and many people in high intensity training are huge advocates of Ayn Rand's philosophy and of Atlas Shrugged. We'll be rereading that or finishing that for sure. I'm very excited to do that because I started watching the movies, and Richard said it best. He said it's like painting a mustache on the Mona Lisa. Like it's like you can't. The book, it does no justice to the books. So that was a bit of an eye-opening statement from him, and made me want to definitely read the book. A lot of the principles of objectivism really do resonate with me. And many people will have know who Dr. James Steele is. He's been on this podcast many times, and he's a huge advocate of objectivism, and it's led a lot of his decisions in his own life and his own principles. So you immerse yourself in that, completely changed your life. We again can pull from that. I'm just aware of time. I do want to obviously get to the kind of height of your success, so we kind of finish off that story. But so what happened next? So you were able to basically, you talked there about leverage and automation, right?
Yes.
You were able to go from group sessions, generating far more income per hour. Where were you at then on a monthly revenue basis?
I got to £5,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I realized I needed a mentor. And I found, just to give you the long story short, I ended up finding a guy called Bezos, who is the CEO of Fit Body Bootcamp. And at the time, he doesn't have it anymore, but at the time he had something called the 7-figure mastermind. And I was like, and at this time as well, money was like, making lots of money was my goal. So I was like, I don't want to be one of these 6-figure PTs. I want to be a 7-figure PT. And really mature, as you can imagine. And so I got in contact and I joined his mastermind. And it was like $24,000 a year membership, which was quite a lot. But I've always lived quite frugally, so I'd saved, and I bought into it. Around that time, I became very consumed with their mentality. And for some people, their mentality works. And for a lot of it, it worked for me. But what they do is they get you worked up into this. You've got to rise, you've got to grind. If you're not working, if you're not growing, you're dying. All that kind of very macho, I've got something to prove, like F everyone and like chip on my shoulder. I'm going to like flip you off with my success and from my Rolls Royce kind of mentality. And the good thing is that with that, I worked ridiculously hard and I got to £16,000 a month with my membership, because they were guiding me with advertising and how to do certain things and putting processes in place and learning how to sell properly in the right order. Because when it comes to selling, the order that you do things is more important than how you're selling it. And so I started learning more about that, started getting more into the psychology of things. And what would happen is I would work crazy. I would work 10 days, giving it everything. And by that 10th day, I'm so burnt out, I would just feel like an absolute failure as I'm in bed watching Netflix. But bearing in mind, at this point, I'd reached £16,000 a month. I was doing 15 hours a week training hours. So by this point, I've never earned more money in my life. I've never worked less for it. And so I feel like by this point, I'm starting to feel like a bit of a fraud, because these people who I really admire are saying, oh, you've got to keep going, you've got to always be working. And because I'm not putting in that level of work that they always seem to be able to do, social media again, I feel like a fraud, like a failure. And so sometimes I felt like by that point, I started feeling like there's something wrong with me. I'm broken. And I would go out. I'll never forget it. I went out so you're expected to go to America like for their intensive like mastermind meetings. And we got put into these breakout groups, and you share everything. You share how much money you're making, your profit loss, all that kind of stuff. And as I'm sitting there, I'm in a room of about 20 people and going around the table, and they're talking about how much money they're making, their revenue. And by this point, so I'm making, was it about $180,000 a year by this point? Mm-hmm. And the next person up in revenue from me is 1.5 million. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge gap between us. And I'm thinking, wow, these people are like where I need to be. And I'm talking to these people, and I'm like, and they're asking questions around the table that you're putting forward your challenges. And without fail, I'm answering every single question, like telling them what to do, how to do it better. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at these people, and I'm thinking, I'm so much smarter than this person. Why am I not making their money? Mm-hmm. And then something happened. When we went around the table to say how much our revenue was, out of every single person, 2 of us, myself included, were making profit. Every single one of us, every single one of them around the table were massively in debt. They were overworking. So when I'm standing up and saying, yeah, I made 10% profit last year, and they're like, oh, wow, how many hours does it take? And I'm like, I do 15 hours a week. And they're looking at me with daggers, thinking, how is that possible? And like there are couples in the room bawling their eyes out because they never get to see their kids, and they're in massive amounts of debt. And it's just like their business has become the worst thing in the world to them. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, what's your facility like? I'm like, it's just an empty hall when I use a couple of dumbbells. And I was just like, and they just couldn't get it. And then what happened is it's just like, everyone starts turning on you because you're like, oh, you're not working hard enough, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, they don't accept.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that point, so there's a guy called Alex Epstein, who is an objectivist, who I admire greatly. And I listened to his podcast. And on that podcast, he had a therapist come on and do a talk. And it turns out to be someone who he's worked with before. This therapist's name is Brent Charlton. And when he was talking, I was like, oh my God, all of this makes so much sense. And I was just like, I was blown away by the sense that he was talking about self-mastery, about controlling your emotions, because I was getting to the point where I was working, like I said, 15 hours a week doing these sessions. I was making £16,000 a month, but I was miserable because you're constantly thinking that why am I not, that what's wrong with me? Why don't I feel like I'm in a good place? I'd have killed to be where I am 2 years ago. And I just resent where I am. And the culture that I'd created in the room was just awful. People were getting injured because of the amount that I was training them. This was before HIIT training.
Sure.
And then, so, I was injuring all these people. Mm-hmm. And then I went and on a, like an objectivist kind of meetup group where Yaron Brook was talking, listening to him. And he told me about Mike Mentzer and Dr. Doug McGuff, which sent me on this whole other path and made me realize how wrong I had been. So remember, in the mastermind group, it's all about, you want to get your clients there 5-6 days a week. You want to train them really hard like athletes, because that's what these people want. And they want to be beasted. They want to be blasted. And I was finding the opposite. People were turning out, they're doing it for a little bit of time, getting injured or not coming back at all. And they were just like people, and the culture that I had created was very much like very macho. And so when I switched to HIIT business, first of all, it was really tough for me to like, okay, great. Now I have to tell everyone you're training too much. Mm-hmm. And like a lot of fear and stuff came around. So then I felt very conflicted with my own beliefs, and it took me a lot of time to figure that out. And so when I heard this like therapist talking on this podcast, I was like, that's it. That's what I need. So I went straight on. I bought his online program, did that. Then I went and paid to go and fly out to Texas, where it was him working with a copywriter. Mm-hmm. And I was sat in the room and I just went through this whole transformation of becoming, like, just shifting all of my beliefs and realizing how I was just putting myself further and further into the ground. Because when you're constantly trying to go, you're doing mentally what HIIT training is all about physically. So, you know, when you have to do high intensity, but then get lots of recovery, it's exactly the same for your own mental well-being as well. You can only push so much until you're burnt out, and then you just have to recover. And that's okay. To learn that it's okay to relax.
Yeah.
And, you know, I realized in that moment that I had more, it was my own mental issues, my own mental blocks around money, around work, that had to do with why I wasn't growing or why I wasn't succeeding as much as I was. And once I started removing some of those blocks, I've got myself into an even better position. So now, for example, I do 6 hours a week of training and haven't dropped members really at all. Like, COVID has taken about 40% of my clients away, but because of how flexible I made everything, it hasn't actually affected my bottom line at all. I've just, the expenses I would have paid.
Right?
Yeah, I dropped the overhead, and then so everything else has sort of stayed the same. Mm-hmm. And now I work even less time and get to spend more time doing the stuff that I really love to do. And for me, that is the teaching of the principles. Mm-hmm. And I used to be so secretive about teaching the methods, because I thought, if they learn this stuff, they're going to take the information and they're going to go and they'll cut out me, they'll cut out the middleman. Yeah. And I've found that it's completely the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, and that's what brings me to today, I guess.
I love that. It's an amazing story, Tom. I love hearing, I'd loved hearing that, because I knew obviously a lot of that stuff you've shared with me offline, but it's just so awesome to hear in detail. So there's 6 hours. Are those 6 hours like training or phone calls, like online coaching? Like, what's the mix?
So 6 hours is my total training time, I would say. So that's it. Don't do any more.
And you're doing it in person or virtually at the moment?
I do 3 hours of that offline and the rest of it online.
Okay. Quick side note, I was watching, just aware of time, so I'll probably wrap up in a moment, but I was watching a Jeff Bezos interview this morning. Obviously, Jeff Bezos, probably, I think, richest guy in the world right now, owner of Amazon. I think he's worth like 180 billion or something. Mm-hmm. And to echo what you said there about work and recovery, he was saying how he has, and this is the richest guy in the world, has an enormous team of thousands of people, people that report into him who need his input. Like, there's no one who's quote unquote busier than Jeff Bezos, right? Or very few people. And he was saying, no, I get 10, 11 hours sleep every night. I spend my mornings with my children. I like to potter. This is how he put it verbatim. I like to potter around in the morning, right? Like, chill out, read the newspaper, spend time with my kids before they go to school. And then he's like, I only have my high IQ meeting at 10 a.m. to get the most important stuff done. And obviously, when you're a senior executive, your most important role is making high quality decisions, basically. And then obviously you're delegating the majority of the work to your team. But it was a real kind of powerful example of the importance of being on, and when you're on, really being on, for that set period of time. I'm sure Jeff Bezos probably does work a large number of hours, but we're talking about the extreme here. And then when you're off, just switching off and just having boundaries. And burnout is real. You can work yourself into the ground, and it can make you really, really miserable. I've made that mistake numerous times. So no, I appreciate you just kind of talking about that and highlighting the importance of that so people can find balance. Now, amazing story. And I think whilst I think we perhaps do another podcast in the future with maybe some more kind of actionable tactics to how people can generate that kind of income, but I think you did touch on some. And I think the important thing for people to know is, yes, strive for building a business that gives you the financial freedom that you need, but don't do it at the expense of your own happiness, and really make sure that you are doing the work that you find most passionate and most meaningful when you're building this kind of business. Tom, how can people, is there anything else, any parting words you've got before we wrap up?
There are two major things I'd like to mention.
Sure.
I watched recently an interview with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, both very wealthy in their own right. And in this interview, the interviewer asked if they could see the schedule of the daily schedule of what they were like. Bill Gates opens up his schedule and he has his scheduled in 15-minute blocks. Warren Buffett pulls out his book and he has one thing on each day.
Yeah.
Now, there are two ways of being very successful. You can do the Bill Gates way and be massively fully booked out. But what kind of life does that give you? Is that a life that you really want? Now, for me, I value more my freedom and my time more than anything else. Where you can go for the more Warren Buffett method, where it's all about doing high leverage and creating exponential income, skills and assets. So that's where you learn something very simple, and it's very scalable. Mm-hmm. And one thing I have noticed in this industry, especially the HIT community, is people love fancy jargon words. Just by simplifying what you're saying and thinking of analogies like the football one I mentioned earlier, mm-hmm. you will reach people on such a deeper level. The next thing, which is very simple, it's to remember that your life is the most important thing to you. Without your life, without you being alive, you cannot help a single person. You cannot do anything. So always ask yourself, am I doing the right thing for me? Am I in the right position? And if that means that for you to feel happy and to do everything you want to do, and that means you're working 12 hours a day, that's great. That's what works for you. I personally cannot live that way. I like having as much free time as possible. That's it, basically.
Yeah, beautifully put. And I'm probably more like you in that sense, for sure. And just a note to say, Tom is obviously part of HIT Business membership. If you're interested in learning how to get results in your HIT business or starting from scratch, I mean, we're talking here about startup really, and how you can grow a business even without a studio. And in times like these, that might be a better option for many of you, or maybe even the online route, as Tom has found for much of his business. So if you're interested in being able to get results in your business and grow a high intensity training business, then please join the membership, highintensitybusiness.com/membership. And to find the blog post for this episode and download the free resource to help you start and grow your HIT business, please go to highintensitybusiness.com and search for episode 282. And Tom, where can people find out more about you? Just, your website and things like that.
My website is chigwellpersonaltraining.com, or you can reach me out on Instagram, like Chigwell Personal Training. And I just want to say, if people do want to talk and have a greater, just a bit more of an in-depth conversation, more than happy to help, because at the same time, I was that person once too.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate that, Tom. And we'll link up all those resources in the show notes. And for everyone listening, until next time, thank you very much for listening.